Some people don't leave the past behind. They fold it small, hide it in a different language, and hope the rain never brings it to their door. Until one evening, it does, and our story begins right now. The rain had been falling since 4 in the afternoon, the kind of rain Paris wore well. Fine, grey, persistent, turning the cobbles of the Rue Lepic into a dark mirror that swallowed the light of the street lamps and gave nothing back. By 7, most of the tourists had given up and fled toward the metro, their collars turned up, their maps ruined. By 8, Montmartre belonged to itself again. Inside the café at number 42, Hélène wiped down the zinc counter for the 3rd time that hour. There was nothing left to wipe. The surface had long since caught the amber of the copper lamps overhead, a soft shine that moved when she moved, and she knew every scratch in it the way another woman might know the lines of her own palm. 4 years. 4 years of standing on this particular square of worn tile. 4 years of this particular view. The window fogged at its edges, the street beyond it dissolving into wet light, the narrow green door that nobody had opened in almost an hour. She had 3 customers left. An elderly man in the corner who always ordered the same pichet of red and read the same battered copy of Camus without ever seeming to turn a page. 2 students by the window, murmuring over a shared cigarette they weren't technically allowed to smoke indoors. She didn't have the heart, most nights, to tell them. Her hair had been short for 2 years now. She'd cut it herself, in a bathroom in the 14th arrondissement, the first week she'd arrived, standing over a porcelain sink with a pair of kitchen scissors and a resolve she hadn't felt in years. The curls had fallen around her feet in soft, dark spirals, and she had stared at the stranger in the mirror until the stranger began to feel less strange. The glasses had come later. She didn't need them, not really. Her eyesight had always been perfect. But the frames, thin and tortoiseshell, did something to the architecture of her face. They gave her a different mouth, a different seriousness. Behind them, she was someone who had never been a war, never been a courtroom, never been a headline. Behind them, she was a woman who owned a café in Montmartre and knew the name of every supplier within 3 streets, and slept alone in a small apartment above the shop with a cat she had named, in a fit of private irony, Minerva. She had not performed a single piece of magic in 3 years, 11 months, and 16 days. She had stopped counting only the days. The years and months kept themselves. The bell above the door chimed. She did not look up immediately. Part of running a quiet café was knowing when to let a customer settle, when to let them shake the water from their coat and find a table and become, for a moment, invisible. She heard the sound of wet wool, the faint creak of a chair being drawn out, the soft percussion of rain sliding from fabric onto tile. A tall figure, she could tell that much from the corner of her eye. A dark coat, expensive by the way it held its shape even soaked through. He chose the small round table in the corner opposite Camus, the one nearest the window, and he sat with his back to the counter. She liked customers who sat with their backs to her. It meant they didn't want anything yet. She finished wiping the counter. She straightened a stack of saucers that did not need straightening. She watched the students gather their coats, leave too few coins on the table, wave to her with the distracted cheerfulness of the young, and disappear into the wet dark. Camus, without lifting his eyes from his page, raised 2 fingers in what she had come to understand was his request for the bill. She brought it. He paid in exact change, as he always did, nodded once, and let himself out into the rain with the careful, economical movements of a man who had done this every Tuesday for as long as she had owned the place. Now there was only the man in the corner. She waited half a minute more. Then she crossed to his table, notebook in one hand, pencil tucked behind her ear. Bonsoir. Qu'est-ce que je vous sers? He didn't turn. He was looking at the window, or perhaps at his own reflection in it, and his voice, when it came, was low and unhurried and perfectly accented. Not the careful French of a foreigner who had learned well, but the French of someone who had lived inside the language long enough for it to have rearranged the shape of his mouth. Un café, noir, et un verre d'eau, s'il vous plaît. Très bien. She wrote nothing down. There was nothing to write. She turned back toward the counter, and as she turned, she caught the briefest outline of his profile in the window's dark glass. A sharp line of jaw, a pale hand lifted to push wet hair back from his forehead. And she felt something small and old move inside her chest. A recognition that was not yet recognition, the way one sometimes hears a melody at a great distance and knows, without being able to name it, that one has loved it before. She did not let herself look again. At the machine, her hands did what her hands had done 10,000 times. Grind, tamp, lock, press. The hiss of steam, the slow, dark fall of the espresso into the small white cup. She set a single square of dark chocolate on the saucer beside it. Her own small habit. One of the few things she had allowed herself to keep of the woman she had been. A woman who had always believed that bitterness required its counterweight. A slice of lemon rind beside the water glass. She arranged the tray, lifted it, and walked the 7 steps back to the corner table. Votre café, monsieur. He turned. She had set the cup down already. Her hand was still on the saucer. She looked up because some instinct told her to, because the air in the café had shifted in a way she could not have named, and she looked up directly into a face she had last seen across a marble atrium in London, under different lights, wearing a different silence. His eyes found hers a fraction of a second after hers found his. She watched the exact moment his recognition overtook him, the small, involuntary narrowing, the pause between one breath and the next, the way his fingers, which had been lifting to accept the cup, stopped mid-air, as though the air itself had become a substance he could not move through. He said nothing for what felt like a long time. Then, so quietly that she would not have heard it if she had not been standing directly over him. Granger. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a great height. She felt it in the soles of her feet. She felt it in the hollow of her throat. 4 years of French, 4 years of Hélène, 4 years of teaching her mouth and her ears, and the bones of her face to respond to a different arrangement of sounds, and one word in one voice, and all of it was water, all of it was gone. She did not move her hand from the saucer. She did not step back. Later, she would wonder at this, at how her body, which had spent 4 years learning how to flee at the first hint of the old world, had simply refused to flee. As though some deeper part of her had been waiting, without her permission, for exactly this. His hair was longer than it had been, darker at the temples with water, The line of his mouth was the same and not the same. Something had been subtracted from it or added to it in the years between. He was thinner, not gaunt, honed, like a blade that had been set over and over against the stone. She did not say his name. She could not yet. Her voice, when she found it, belonged to Hélène and was therefore in French. Vous prenez votre café, monsieur. Il va refroidir. Take your coffee. It's going to go cold. It was such a small sentence. It was the sentence of a café owner to a customer. It was also, she understood as she said it, a kind of mercy. Hers, or his, she could not have said. A door she was leaving open for him. You may pretend you did not recognize me. You may drink your coffee and go back out into the rain, and we will both survive this. He did not take the cup. His hand was still suspended an inch above the saucer, his fingers half curled, as though he had forgotten what they were for. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before and could not immediately name. Not shock. Shock had passed already in that first breath. Something quieter, something that looked almost like grief, though she could not have said whose. Your hair, he said, in English, quiet, as though he was speaking to himself. She did not answer. Behind her, the rain went on. The copper lamps hummed their faint amber hum. The clock above the bar read 20 minutes to 10. The green door stood closed against the street, and the street was empty, and the whole small lit room was suddenly, terribly, only the two of them, and the cup of coffee between them, going cold, because neither of them had remembered yet how to move. She took her hand from the saucer. The movement was small. It was also, she would realize later, the first decision she had made in 4 years that belonged to the other woman, the one with the long hair, the one whose name was not Hélène, the one she had buried under a different sky and sworn never to exhume. She stepped back, only a step, just enough to breathe. His eyes followed her as though attached by a thread. And behind the counter, in the copper-lit quiet, with the rain running down the window in slow, uneven rivers, she reached up without thinking and touched the edge of her own jaw, the place where her hair no longer was, as though to remind herself, or him, or both of them, that 4 years had in fact passed, that something had in fact been changed, that she was not. She lowered her hand. He had still not drunk his coffee. The cup sat between them like a small white question. She watched him from behind the counter, or rather, she watched the back of his shoulder, the damp, dark wool of his coat, where it met the line of his neck, the pale edge of his hair curling slightly where the rain had caught it. He had turned back toward the window after she stepped away. He had not drunk. He had not stood. He had not done any of the things a man might reasonably do after finding a ghost behind a café counter in Montmartre on a Tuesday night. He had simply remained. She untied her apron. Her fingers were steady, which surprised her. She would not have bet on them 5 minutes ago. She folded the cloth in half, then in quarters, then set it on the shelf beneath the espresso machine with a precision that had nothing to do with neatness. It was the precision of a person keeping her hands busy because her hands, left to themselves, would have given her away. 4 years. 4 years of teaching herself that the old world was a country she no longer held a passport to. 4 years of bonjour and merci and je vous en prie. 4 years of the particular music of this neighborhood. The baker 2 doors down who called her Ma Petite, though she was nearly 30. The flower seller at the corner who always saved her the last of the yellow freesias on Fridays. The old woman on the 3rd floor opposite who watered her geraniums at exactly 7 every morning and nodded to Helene through the window as though they had known each other in another life. She had built this, stone by careful stone, a life so quiet that even her own reflection had begun to believe in it. And now a man had walked in out of the rain and said one word, and the stones were loose again. She crossed to the door. The green paint was chipped in its familiar places. The brass handle was cool under her palm. She turned the lock, the small final click of the bolt sliding home, and flipped the wooden sign that hung on a length of twine against the glass. Fermé, closed. She did not look at him as she did this. She did not need to. She could feel the attention of the room shift with the sound of the lock, could feel him understanding, without turning, what she had just done. She had not asked him to leave. She had not opened the door for him. She had closed it. She did not know yet whether she had done this for his sake or for hers. Perhaps it did not matter. Perhaps, on certain evenings, those were the same thing. She walked the length of the counter slowly. She took down a second cup. She did not ask him if he wanted company. She made herself a coffee, an espresso the same as his, though she almost never drank them at this hour, preferring tisane, preferring anything that would let her sleep. And she set the cup on a small white saucer, and she carried it to his table, and she sat down across from him without waiting for permission. He looked up. In the light of the copper lamp above their table, his eyes were not the colour she remembered. Or perhaps they were, and she had only remembered them wrong. Grey, yes, but warmer than grey. A grey with weather in it, a grey like the Seine in November, like the pigeons that lifted off the Pont Neuf at dawn, like the slate roofs of this arrondissement, under a sky that could not decide whether to rain. She had not expected to think in those terms about his eyes. She had not, in truth, expected to think about his eyes at all. "You locked the door," he said. He had switched back to French. She understood immediately what he was offering her. A different country, a different tongue, a neutral field on which neither of them had ever fought a war. "Oui," she said. "Il est presque 10 heures." It's almost 10. It was a lie, or half of one. She usually closed at 10:30 on Tuesdays, and he must have known it, because he had been walking past this café for God knew how long, and a man like him did not fail to notice such things. But he accepted the lie. He nodded once, as though thanking her for it. He lifted his cup finally and drank. She watched him drink. It was an unseemly thing to watch, and she could not have said why she watched it. Something about the steadiness of his hand, perhaps, or the way he closed his eyes for the briefest second as the coffee met his mouth, as though he had been colder than he had realized. "It's good," he said, in French still. "Merci." "I've walked past this café," he said, and stopped, and for a moment she thought he would not finish the sentence. Then, "many times." "Je sais." She had not known. She had said it because it seemed the right thing to say, and because she had learned in 4 years of standing behind that counter that people who confessed to having walked past needed to be told that their walking had been witnessed, that they had not been invisible, even when they had wished to be. He set the cup down. His fingers remained around it, loosely, as though for the warmth. "I didn't," he began. He stopped again. He tried once more, in French. "Je ne suis jamais entré. I never came in. Pourquoi ce soir?" Why tonight? He looked at the window. The rain had slackened but not stopped. The street outside was still a dark, wet ribbon of reflected light. A scooter went past, its small red tail light dissolving into the wet. "Il pleuvait," he said. It was raining. That was all. That was the whole answer. And she understood it. She understood it completely, because it was the same answer she would have given if anyone had ever asked her why she had walked into the particular estate agent's office on the particular afternoon 4 years ago, the one that had handed her the keys to this particular café. Because it was raining, because her shoes were wet, because sometimes a door is simply the nearest door, and one has run out of the strength required to walk past it. She lifted her own cup. The coffee was bitter and very hot, and it tasted, for a reason she could not name, like something she had not tasted in a long time. Not the coffee itself, which she drank every day, but the act of drinking coffee across a table from another person who knew her, who had known her, whose knowing had been set aside by mutual and unspoken agreement, but which sat nevertheless between them on the small round table, unfinished, like a letter neither of them had signed. "Vous habitez Paris?" she asked. "You live in Paris?" He nodded. 7 years? "Où?" "Le Marais." She nearly smiled. Of course, the Marais, the narrow streets, the old stone, the quiet money, the shops that sold single objects in their windows, as though each were a small museum. It suited him. It suited a version of him she had never known, but could, she realized, easily imagine. A man who walked to the same boulangerie every morning, who knew his bookseller by name, who had learned to live so quietly that a whole city had grown up around his quiet, and agreed, out of some kind of Parisian grace, not to disturb it. "And you," he said, still in French, "you live here, above." It was not a question. He had looked up, on the way in perhaps, and seen the light in the window on the 2nd floor. Or he had guessed. Or he had simply known, the way one knows certain things about certain people without being told, that she was not the kind of woman who would own a café and sleep anywhere else. "Oui. Since when?" 4 ans. He took that in. He did not ask the next question, the obvious question, the question any reasonable person would have asked. And she understood, watching him not ask it, that he was not going to. That he had decided, somewhere between the door and the cup, that he would not be the one to drag the old country into this room. That whatever else he had been, and whatever else he had done, he was capable of this particular courtesy, of letting a woman who had disappeared remain disappeared, even while sitting at her table. The relief that went through her was so complete that for a moment she could not speak. She set her cup down. She folded her hands on the tabletop and caught herself doing it, caught the old ministry gesture, the way she used to fold her hands across a file before delivering an unwelcome recommendation, and she unfolded them at once. She let them rest flat. She spread her fingers slightly against the wood, as though to remind them that they belonged here now, to this grain, to this small circle of lamplight, to this night that was not yet over. He was watching her hands. He looked away when he realized she had noticed. "Vous avez mangé?" she asked. "Have you eaten?" a small flicker at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile, but the place where a smile would have been, in another life, on another face. Non, j'ai du pain et du fromage. Rien de sérieux. Ce sera parfait. She rose. She went behind the counter. She cut bread from the half-loaf left over from the afternoon. She took down the small wooden board. She arranged 2 kinds of cheese and a few olives, and the last of the figs from the market on Sunday. And she did all of it with the slow, deliberate care of a woman who was trying very hard not to think about what she was doing or why. When she turned back with the board, he had shifted in his chair. He had taken off his coat. He had hung it over the back of the neighbouring chair, where it dripped slowly onto the tile, and he was sitting in a dark jumper that she had never seen before, and that looked, improbably, as though it had been made of something softer than wool. His forearms rested on the table. His sleeves were pushed up to the elbow. She set the board between them. She sat down again. Neither of them reached for the bread. "Hélène," she said after a moment. He looked up. "C'est le nom sur la porte." The name on the door. He nodded slowly. He did not ask what the name meant, or why she had chosen it, or any of the other questions she had half expected. He only inclined his head slightly, the way one does when accepting a gift that one has not earned and does not know how to thank the giver for. "Et vous?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, in French, very softly, "Ici, je m'appelle Drago." Here, I am called Drago. The small French vowel at the end of his name, the way it rounded off what the English had always left sharp. She felt something move in her chest, not pain exactly, and not tenderness, but something adjacent to both, some third thing that did not have a name in either of the languages she spoke. She lifted the bread. She tore a piece from it and set it on the edge of the board nearest him. A small gesture, a smaller permission. He took it. Outside, the rain picked up again, a sudden soft increase, a rushing against the glass, and the green door stayed closed, and the copper lamps hummed, and across the small round table their hands moved slowly in the old human choreography of a shared meal, as though neither of them had eaten in a very long time, and as though neither of them, for the moment, remembered how to be anywhere else. They ate the way people eat who are not quite hungry, slowly, with long pauses, reaching for the bread more often than they reached for the cheese, letting the small gestures of the meal do what their words could not yet manage. She had forgotten, or almost forgotten, that this was one of the oldest things 2 people could do together. Sit at a table, share a loaf, say nothing, and have the nothing mean something. The rain thickened against the window. Somewhere above them, in the apartment she had not yet gone up to, Minerva would be waiting on the windowsill for the sound of the key in the lock. The cat would be hungry by now and affronted, and Elaine would hear about it in the particular register of feline grievance that only cats who believed themselves underfed were capable of producing. She thought of this and did not move. "C'est bon," he said, of the cheese. "C'est de la rue des Abbesses." "Je connais la fromagerie." "Évidemment." A small sound from him, not quite a laugh, but the breath one releases when a laugh has been considered and set aside as too large for the moment. He tore another piece of bread. His hands, she noticed, were not the hands she remembered. They were longer, or seemed so. The knuckles were more pronounced. There was a fine white scar across the base of his left thumb that had not been there in the old country, or that she had not known to look for. She watched him break the bread, and she understood, with a quiet that surprised her, that she was not going to ask about the scar. Not tonight. Perhaps not ever. There was an architecture forming between them already, invisible, provisional, built out of the things they were agreeing not to say. And to ask about the scar would have been to take a hammer to a load-bearing wall. "The bread is from this morning," she said, in French. "It isn't at its best. It is exactly at its best. You're being polite. I am almost never polite. Ask anyone." She did look up then, and she caught the corner of his mouth where the not smile had returned, and for the first time since he had said her old name, she felt the air in the café settle into something she could breathe. "I won't ask anyone," she said. "No, I suppose you won't." It was the closest either of them had come, in half an hour, to acknowledging the thing that sat at the centre of the table like a fourth guest. She saw him register it as he said it. She saw him decide very deliberately not to follow the thread. He reached instead for an olive. He ate it slowly. He set the pit on the rim of the small dish she had put out for exactly that purpose, and the sound of the pit against the china was small and domestic and absurdly loud in the quiet. "Tell me about the café," he said. "What about it?" "Anything. How you found it. What it was before. Whether the pipes behave themselves in February." "The pipes do not behave themselves in February. I suspected as much. There is a particular joint above the sink that begins to weep around the 15th, and if I do not climb onto the counter with a spanner by the 16th, the weeping becomes a proper flood by the 18th. And do you climb onto the counter with a spanner? Every year. Alone. Every year." He said nothing to that. He only looked at her across the small board of bread and cheese, and something in his expression shifted. A softening at the corners of the eyes, a lowering of some interior fence she had not realized was still standing. She had given him, without meaning to, a piece of the new life, a small domestic absurdity, a woman on a counter in February with a spanner in her hand. He was holding it carefully. She could see him holding it. "And before," he said, "the café, what was it?" "A tabac. Before that, a bookbinder, apparently. The old man down the street told me the first week. He said the bookbinder's widow sold the lease in 1973, and no one has done anything sensible with the space since. And you were sensible. I was desperate." It came out before she could stop it. She had not meant to say it. She had not said that word aloud in 4 years, not even inside her own head, and certainly not in the particular register of quiet confession in which it had just left her mouth. She felt her own hand move, involuntarily, toward the edge of her collar, the small gesture she had trained out of herself long ago, the one she used to make in courtrooms when a question had gone closer to the bone than she had been prepared for. She caught the hand. She returned it to the table. He did not comment. He did not lean forward. He did not do any of the things a less careful man might have done with the word she had just offered him. He only lifted his cup and drank the last swallow of his coffee and set the cup down again with a steadiness that was, she realized, its own kind of answer. "And has it," he said at last, "been sensible in the end?" "Yes." "Good." The word landed strangely. A single English syllable dropped into the French like a coin into still water. She watched the ripples of it move outward and die. He had not meant to say it in English. She was almost certain of that. It had escaped him, the way her desperate had escaped her, and they were, even now, the two of them, in some quiet ledger. Neither of them was keeping out loud. She stood. She was not going anywhere. She stood only to move, because sitting had become, for the moment, too much. She crossed to the counter, took down the bottle of Armagnac she kept on the second shelf for particular customers on particular nights, and brought it back with two small glasses tucked between the fingers of her other hand. "It is not offered," she said, setting the glasses down, "to the general public. I am honored." "You shouldn't be. It's only that the rain is showing no sign of stopping, and we appear to have a long night ahead of us." She had said it lightly. She heard it land heavily. A long night ahead of us, as though they had already agreed that there would be one, as though the night were a thing they were going to cross together, hand over hand, like a rope strung across a river. She did not correct it. She poured. He lifted his glass. He did not propose a toast. Neither did she. They drank in the same moment without touching rims, and the Armagnac was old and slow and warm, and it moved down through her chest like a small fire lit in a room that had been cold for a very long time. "Tell me about the Marais," she said, when she could speak again. "There is nothing to tell." "There is always something to tell. There is a street. There is a particular window. There is a bookshop on the ground floor of my building, and the woman who owns it, Madame Lenoir, she is 84, has decided, without consulting me, that I am lonely. She leaves things outside my door, small editions, a volume of Apollinaire last Tuesday, a book about sparrows the week before that." "Are you lonely?" She had not meant to ask it. It came out in the same voice in which she had said desperate, and she heard it the moment it left her, and she did not take it back. She set her glass down. She kept her eyes on the rim of it. He was quiet for a long time. "Madame Lenoir," he said finally, "is not often wrong." She did not answer. She could not, immediately. She reached instead for the bottle and refilled his glass, and then hers, and the small, ordinary motion gave her something to do with her hands, while the answer he had just given her settled into the room. He had not said yes. He had not said the word. He had given her the shape of the word, wrapped carefully in someone else's name, and he had let her take it or leave it as she wished. She took it. She did not show him that she had taken it. She only lifted her refilled glass and looked, finally, back up at him. The copper lamp above them had begun, very faintly, to flicker. An old fixture, the wiring uncertain on damp nights, a problem she had been meaning for months to ask the electrician about. The light wavered across his face in a slow pulse, darkening and brightening the hollow beneath his cheekbone, the small shadow at the corner of his mouth. He did not notice the flicker, or he did notice and had decided, as he had decided about everything else tonight, that it did not require remark. "And you," he said, "here, alone. I have a cat. That is not what I asked." "I know." Another silence, longer this time. She could hear the rain on the zinc roof of the back courtyard, a different sound from the rain on the window, deeper, more percussive, the old tin drumming under the weight of it. She could hear the small hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. She could hear, or thought she could hear, her own pulse in the hollow of her throat. "I am alone," she said. "Yes, by choice, by necessity, which became choice, which became—" She stopped. She did not know what the third thing was. She only knew it had a shape, and that the shape was not unhappy, and that she had not tried to describe it to anyone in 4 years because there had been no one to describe it to. "Which became this," she said finally. "Whatever this is." "This is a good café," he said. "Yes." "With a woman who climbs onto counters in February." "Yes." "Who keeps Armagnac on the second shelf for particular customers." "On particular nights." "And what makes tonight particular?" He had asked it softly. He had asked it without looking at her. He was, very carefully, looking at his own glass. And she understood that he had asked it as a gift, that he was giving her the option of answering it or not. That either answer or no answer at all would be accepted without comment and without the night ending. She considered the question. She considered, for the first time in 4 years, telling the truth. "The rain," she said. He nodded slowly. He lifted his glass. He did not drink from it yet. "The rain," he agreed. And above them the copper lamp gave a final small flicker, not enough to go out, only enough to dim for the length of a breath. And in the brief half-dark, his hand, which had been resting on the table beside the board, moved a fraction of an inch. Not toward her, not away, only a fraction, a small uncertain shift, the hand of a man who had not decided yet what his hand was for. She watched it move. She did not move her own. The lamp came back up. His hand had stilled. It lay on the wood exactly where it had been a moment before, or almost exactly, and she could not have said afterward whether she had imagined the shift at all, only that the space between his hand and hers had become, in the length of that flicker, a thing she was suddenly and acutely aware of, a small, precise distance measurable in centimeters, and that she did not, for the life of her, know whether she wanted it to close or to remain. The clock above the bar read 11:15. She had not looked at it on purpose. She had looked at it the way one looks at a clock one has stopped trusting, sidelong, as though to catch it in a lie. And the clock had given back only its small, honest truth, the thin black hands settling calmly against the yellowed face. And she had understood, with a kind of quiet astonishment, that more than an hour had passed since she had locked the door. More than an hour. And they had barely spoken of anything. They had spoken of the café, and of a bookshop in the Marais, and of a cat she had named after a woman they were not mentioning, and of a spanner in February, and of the particular way the rain sounded on the zinc roof at the back of the courtyard. They had spoken, in other words, of nothing. And the nothing had filled the hour so completely that she had not felt the hour pass. She rose to make more coffee. She did not ask him if he wanted one. The question had become unnecessary. Somewhere between the Armagnac and the second silence, it had been decided that he was staying, and that she was letting him, and that the small transactions of the evening, a cup, a refill, another slice of bread, no longer required the courtesy of being named aloud. At the machine, her back to him, she allowed herself a moment she had not allowed herself in 4 years. She closed her eyes. She let the steam rise against her face. She breathed in the dark metallic smell of coffee and the faint ozone tang of the old copper boiler. And she asked herself, very carefully, what she was doing. The answer did not come in words. It came in the small, precise recognition that her shoulders, which had lived for 4 years at a particular height, somewhere just below her ears, pulled up against a cold she had stopped noticing, had dropped. That they had dropped at some point in the last hour, and that she had not given them permission, and that they were showing no sign of returning to their previous station. She opened her eyes. She finished the coffee. She brought 2 cups back to the table. He had taken, while she was gone, a small black notebook from the inside pocket of his coat. It lay closed beside his hand. He had not opened it. He had only set it there, the way a man sets down a familiar object in a new room to help the room begin to feel like his. The cover was leather, soft from use, and a thin black ribbon hung from the spine. She did not ask what was in it. She did not need to. There are certain objects that tell their whole story by their silence. The book a man carries, the photograph he does not show, the ring he has stopped wearing on the correct hand. And she had been, in another life, very good at reading such things. She set his cup down in front of him. Merci. Je vous en prie. She sat. The second Armagnac had warmed her through. The coffee would sharpen her again. And between the two of them, the warmth and the sharpness, she thought she might be able to survive the rest of whatever this was going to be. "What are you reading?" he said. "Now? Now. These days. Whatever you have upstairs on the table beside the bed." She thought about lying. She thought about naming something French, something respectable, something that would fit the woman she had made of herself. She did not. Le Grand Maulnais. Again? She looked up. She had not told him she was certain that she had read it before. She had not told anyone in Paris that she had read it before. She had bought her French copy 4 years ago from a bouquiniste on the Quai Voltaire, and she had read it slowly with a dictionary, making the old book new by the simple expedient of meeting it in a different language. And she had never, in all that time, spoken of it. "How did you know?" she said. He did not answer immediately. He lifted his cup. He drank. He set it down. "You used to carry it," he said. "In 6th year, in the library. You had the English edition. You kept it at the bottom of your stack so no one would see." Her hand closed around the handle of her cup. "I noticed," he said, "because I was paying attention to your stack." It was not a confession. It was not offered as one. It was said the way one might mention in passing that one had once taken a particular train, a fact too old to matter, produced only because the conversation had made room for it. And yet the room had gone still around the sentence, and she could hear her own pulse again, and the copper lamp above them was steady now, and the small, careful architecture they had been building all evening had just admitted, without ceremony, the first beam from the old country. She did not reprimand him for it. She could not. He had stepped over the line so quietly that she had not heard the line crack, and there was no way to put it back without drawing attention to the breach. "I didn't know," she said. "No, you weren't meant to." "Why?" He considered the question. He turned his cup a quarter turn on its saucer, and another, and the small ceramic sound of it was the only sound in the café for what felt like a long time. "Because," he said finally, "I did not know then what paying attention was for." She did not ask him if he knew now. She did not need to. The rain had slackened again. Through the window, the Rue Lepic had taken on the particular late-night stillness of Paris in bad weather. The cobbles black and shining, a single cat picking its way along the base of a wall, the yellow squares of the upper windows opposite going out one by one as the neighborhood surrendered itself to sleep. The old woman on the third floor had drawn her curtains. The bakery's shutters were down. The whole small corner of the city had become, for the moment, a stage set for two people at a table in a lit café. And the stage was quiet, and the play was one neither of them had read the script for. "May I ask you something?" he said. "You may ask. That is not the same as saying you will answer." "No, it isn't." "Fair enough." He leaned back slightly. The copper light moved across his face. His hair had dried while he sat. It was lighter now than it had been when he walked in, pale at the crown, darker where it curled behind his ear, and she found herself looking at the precise point where the dark met the pale, and then, as though caught, looking away. "What did you want to ask?" she said. "Are you—" He stopped. He began again. "Is there anyone who knows where you are?" She did not answer at once. There was the true answer, and there was the less true answer. There was the answer she gave to herself in the small hours, and the answer she would have given to a solicitor, and the answer she had rehearsed years ago against precisely this kind of question, though she had not expected to be asked it in precisely this voice. "My parents," she said, "in Australia. They know I am in Paris. They do not know the rest. The rest meaning everything that made me come." He nodded slowly. He did not press. "And no one else?" "No one else." "For 4 years." "For 4 years." He was silent. She watched him absorb it. She watched the small muscle in his jaw tighten and release, the way a man might work through a difficult calculation without wanting to show the working. And then she watched him do something she did not expect. She watched him reach very slowly across the small round table and lay the tips of 2 fingers against the back of her hand. It was not a holding. It was not even a touch in the full sense of the word. It was a landing, the brief alighting of 2 fingertips on the bone just below her knuckles, the faintest possible pressure, so light that she could have told herself afterward that she had imagined it, if she had not been able to feel, quite clearly, the cool of his skin against her own. She did not move her hand. She did not move any part of herself. She looked down at the place where his fingers rested, and she looked up at his face, and his face was not giving her anything she could name, only a stillness, a held breath, a question he had not trusted himself to put into words, and had therefore put into the smallest, most retractable gesture available to a grown man. She turned her hand over. She did it slowly. She did it with the deliberate calm of a woman who had made up her mind about nothing at all, who was only testing, perhaps, whether the muscles still remembered the movement, whether her palm could still open without permission from the rest of her. Her hand turned beneath his. His fingertips, which had been resting on the back of it, slid a fraction of an inch and came to rest on the inside of her wrist, on the pulse point. She felt him feel it. She felt him feel, without possibility of hiding, the sudden, unsteady rhythm that had taken up residence beneath her skin the moment his fingers had first landed. and that was now beating against the pad of his index finger with a frankness she could not have lied about if she had tried. His eyes did not leave hers. He did not smile. He did not speak. He only registered. She could see him registering. She could see him cataloguing with the same careful attention he had once apparently given to her stack of library books, the information her wrist had just given him, and she could see him deciding what to do with it. What he did was this. He did not move his hand. He did not press. He did not stroke. He did not tighten his fingers or release them or turn them or do any of the small escalating things that the situation might have invited. He only kept his fingertips exactly where they were, with exactly the pressure they already had, and he let the pulse continue to speak, and he listened to it the way one listens to rain. The coffee cooled between them. The copper lamp held steady. Somewhere, in the far distance, a church bell rang the half hour, 11:30, or perhaps midnight, she could not tell. And neither of them moved, and neither of them spoke, and her hand remained open under his on the worn wood of the small round table, and the rain outside picked up again, a slow, soft percussion against the glass, and the green door stayed closed, and the woman who had called herself Hélène for 4 years discovered, with something that was not quite fear and not quite relief, that she had not, after all, forgotten how to be touched. She did not pull her hand back. Neither did he. His hand lifted eventually, not quickly, not as though retreating. He moved it the way one moves a candle from one end of a table to the other, slowly, so as not to put the flame out. And when his fingers left her wrist, the air where they had been felt noticeably cooler, a small ring of absence on her skin that she was aware of for a long time afterward. He did not apologize for the touch. She was grateful for that. An apology would have reduced it, and whatever it had not been a thing that wanted reducing. He reached for his cup instead. He drank. He set the cup down and turned it again a quarter turn on the saucer, and she understood, watching him do it, that this small rotation of ceramic had become his equivalent of her hands on the edge of her collar, the gesture a body made when the mind required a thing to do. "The coffee is cold," she said. "It is. I'll make another. Don't. Not yet." She did not get up. She let her hand remain where it had been, palm up on the wood, as though by keeping it still she could keep the warmth a moment longer. It did not work. The cool was already there. The cool was what remained. "Tell me about Madame Lenoir," she said. He looked up. A small surprise crossed his face. The brief flicker of a man who had not expected the conversation to loop back to its gentler ground, and who was obscurely pleased to find that it had. "She has 6 cats," he said. "She refers to all of them as Monsieur, regardless of the cat's actual circumstances. She closes the shop whenever she feels like it, and she reopens it whenever she feels like it, and she has a sign in the window that says, 'Ouvert selon l'humeur de Madame,' open according to Madame's mood. A woman after my own heart. I thought you might approve. Does she know anything about you?" "She knows what I have told her, which is not much." "And what have you told her?" He considered. He turned the cup another quarter. "That I came from England, that I work from home, that I do not like to be disturbed before 10 in the morning, that I like Apollinaire, that I was once married, briefly, and that this is not a subject on which I welcome conversation." The word went through her quietly. Married. She had not expected it, and she had also, somewhere beneath expectation, always expected it. The old country had been arranging such things while she was there, and it would have continued to arrange them after she left. She did not ask. She did not need to. He had placed the word on the table face up, and then, with the same motion, drawn a line beneath it. She understood the line as clearly as she understood the word, and she had no intention of crossing it. Briefly, she said. Briefly. How briefly? Less than a year. We were ill-suited. In what way? In every way that mattered, and several that didn't. She did not smile. The sentence had not been offered as a joke, though it had the shape of one. It had been offered the way a man offers the edited version of a long story to someone who has not asked for the long one, a compression performed for her benefit to spare them both. And now she is in Vienna, I think, or was last year. She's a perfectly decent person. We do not write. I see. Do you? Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. The copper lamp had steadied into its amber hum, and in the amber his face had gone a shade she could not have named in any language. Not pale, not flushed, only warmed by light into something that looked, briefly, younger than his years. She caught herself thinking that she had never seen him look his age. In the old country, he had always looked older than he was. In this room, tonight, he looked exactly as old as he was, and the difference was not small. Your turn, he said. My turn for what? You know what? She did know. She had walked herself into it. Ill-suited was a door she had opened, and one did not open such doors without expecting to be asked, in time, to walk through one of one's own. She took a breath. She let it out. 3 years, she said, give or take. The divorce took longer than the marriage was worth. Amicable? No, not in the end. We tried. It turns out trying isn't the same as being able. No, it isn't. He is. She stopped. She considered the words available to her. She rejected most of them. He is a good person who wanted a particular kind of life. I was the woman he thought could provide it. I wasn't. I am not sorry about that, which I think may have been the cruelest part of it, for him. You weren't sorry? No. That does sound cruel. Yes. Good. The word landed between them with the same small weight it had carried earlier. She looked up at him. He did not look away. Good, he said again, more softly. A woman who apologizes for not being someone else is... He stopped. He shook his head fractionally. A woman who apologizes for that has already begun to disappear. She set her hand flat on the table. She spread her fingers slightly against the wood. She did not answer for a long time. When she did, it was in a voice that she could hear, even as she spoke, had dropped a register. Quieter, slower, closer to the register of the other woman, the one with the long hair, the one whose name she had buried under a different sky. I did disappear, she said. For a while. I know. You couldn't have known. You weren't there. I knew you had gone. Everyone knew you had gone. It was remarked upon. By whom? By everyone whose remarking you would have least wanted. She almost laughed. Not quite. I can imagine. No, he said. I don't think you can. I don't think you would want to. There was no bitterness in the way he said it. There was something else, a kind of quiet protectiveness, the tone of a man reporting on a storm he had weathered on her behalf without asking her permission to weather it. She did not know what to do with the tone. She did not know, in truth, what to do with any of it. With the fact that he had apparently been in rooms where her disappearance had been discussed. With the fact that he had apparently listened. With the fact that he had apparently, at some point in the 4 years between her leaving and this Tuesday, formed opinions about the people doing the discussing. She did not ask. She returned, instead, to safer ground. "Tell me what you work on," she said. "At home, before 10 in the morning or after. Translation. From English, occasionally German, into French. Of whatever pays. Poetry when I can. Contracts when I cannot. A novel last spring that I would not wish on a literate dog. And you are good at it." "I am competent. Good is a different thing." "You are being modest." "I am being accurate. There is a translator in the 6th arrondissement who is good. I am not her. I am, however, punctual, which in my line of work is considered nearly as valuable. And it is enough. It is enough. For what?" He paused. He looked at her. "For the life I appear to be living," he said. She understood the sentence in all its careful layers. She understood the weight he had put on appear and the light he had kept from living, and she understood, too, that he had offered her the sentence not as a complaint, but as a report, a man describing the exact dimensions of the small room in which he had chosen to sit out his years. She understood it, because her own life could have been described in almost the same words. The realization went through her without drama. It did not arrive as a blow. It arrived as a recognition. 2 people, she thought, who had agreed with themselves to live at a reduced volume, and who had, for different reasons, found the reduction bearable, and who were now, across a small round table in a café in Montmartre on a wet Tuesday night, hearing their own lives spoken aloud by another voice for the first time in years. She thought she ought to say something. She did not know what. What she did was small. She reached for the board of bread and cheese. There was a last piece of the harder of the 2 cheeses, a dry crumb of it, and she broke the crumb in 2, and she put 1/2 on the edge of the board nearest his cup, and she left the other half where it was, and she said nothing about it. He looked at the cheese. He looked at her. He took it. The small domestic economy of the gesture was not lost on either of them. He had eaten the last of her bread tonight because she had given it to him, and he was eating the last crumb of the cheese now for the same reason, and the act of accepting what she had halved and offered was, it turned out, a harder thing for him to do than she would have expected. She watched him manage it. She watched his throat move as he swallowed. She watched him set the smallest possible pressure of his fingertip on the rim of his empty cup and leave it there. "Hélène," he said. She did not correct him. He had used the name carefully. He had used it because the other name would have been too much at this particular moment for either of them. "Yes. I am going to say something, and then I am going to ask you whether I may stay a little longer." "All right." He did not look away. His eyes in the amber light were steady and very tired and entirely without calculation, and she understood that whatever he was about to say had been composed somewhere between the touch and now, and that he had decided, at some cost she could not see, to deliver it. "This is the first evening in 7 years," he said, "that I have not wanted to be somewhere else." She did not answer immediately. She could not. Something inside her chest, which had been held at a careful height for 4 years, dropped, not with pain, not with pleasure. Only dropped, the way a weight slips from a hand that had not realized it was still carrying it, and she felt the small internal lurch of a thing released. She was going to say something. She opened her mouth to say it. The church bell rang midnight. 12 long, slow strokes from somewhere beyond the Rue des Abbesses. Saint-Jean, perhaps, or one of the smaller chapels. It was hard to tell through the rain. And they counted the strokes together without meaning to, both of their faces tilted very slightly toward the sound. And when the 12th stroke had faded, the café was quieter than it had been before, and the rain had slowed, and the copper lamp above them gave one more small flicker that was, this time, unmistakable. "You may stay," she said. It was all she said. It was all he had asked for. He inclined his head. He did not thank her. He reached, instead, for the Armagnac bottle she had left on the edge of the table, and he poured, a small measure for her, a small measure for himself. And his hand, as he poured, was not entirely steady. She watched his hand. She watched the small tremor at the rim of the glass. She did not remark on it. She lifted her glass when he lifted his, and this time, she let the rim of hers touch the rim of his, a single small chime of crystal against crystal in the quiet room, and she held the rim there a moment longer than was necessary before she drank. The bottle stood between them like a small amber landmark. She had not meant to finish it. She had not meant to do much of what she had done tonight. The evening had become a country in which she no longer consulted her own intentions before moving. Her hands knew what they were doing, or seemed to, and she had decided, somewhere around the midnight bell, to stop watching them so closely. The rain had softened again. It came now in long, patient intervals, a rush against the window, then a pause, then another rush. And between the rushes, the café was quiet enough that she could hear the small metallic tick of the refrigerator cycling behind the counter, and the faint sigh of the copper boiler cooling, and the low, irregular breath of a man who had not moved for several minutes. He was looking at his glass. He had stopped turning it. His hand rested around the rim, the long fingers loose, the thin white scar at the base of his thumb, caught just now in the amber light. She had been trying not to look at the scar. She looked anyway. She looked the way one looks, eventually, at a thing one has promised oneself not to name. "It was a letter opener," he said. She lifted her eyes. "What?" "The scar. You have been looking at it since I pushed up my sleeves. It was a letter opener in my father's study. I was 14. He paused. He set the glass down. "I was being stupid about something. I do not remember what. I remember only that the blade was silver and that the bleeding was far more dramatic than the injury deserved, and that the housekeeper wept, and that my father did not come home for 3 days afterward, which at the time I took as a kind of punishment, but which, in hindsight, was almost certainly nothing to do with me at all." She did not know what to say. She did not know why he had said it. He had said it the way he had said briefly earlier, a compression performed for her benefit, a piece of his life folded small enough to fit between 2 cups. And she understood that the folding itself was the gift. He had reached into the old country, without asking her permission, and taken out one small object, and laid it on the table face up, and invited her to look at it or not. "I am sorry," she said. "Don't be. I bring it up only because you were going to ask eventually, and I preferred to answer before you did." "I wasn't going to ask. You were going to wonder." "Which is worse?" She almost smiled. She did not. "A letter opener," she said. "Silver, crested, absurd. And you were being stupid about something. I was 14. I was being stupid about several things. The letter opener was incidental." She looked at the scar again. It was thin and very clean, and the skin around it was paler than the skin around the other small marks on his hand. Marks she had not, until this moment, allowed herself to catalogue. A knuckle, she thought, that had been broken and reset. A faint silvery line along the side of the index finger. A place on the wrist where something had burned him long ago in a shape too small to read. She did not ask about any of them. She reached, instead, across the table, and she did it before she could talk herself out of it. Two of her fingers, the index and the middle, laid briefly along the back of his hand, at the place just below the knuckles, in the exact mirror of the gesture he had made to her an hour before. She left them there for the space of one breath. She lifted them away. He did not move. He did not look down at his hand. He kept his eyes on her face, and she kept hers on his, and the small mutual steadiness of that looking was, she understood, a kind of transaction. One touch returned for one touch given, a ledger balanced without a word. "We should not be doing this," he said quietly. "I know." "Do you?" "Yes." "Tell me why." She thought about it. She thought about the 4 years she had spent building the woman called Hélène, and the cat upstairs, and the spanner in February, and the particular way her shoulders had lived at a particular height, and the small silent covenant she had made with herself the week she arrived in this city. She thought about the rain. She thought about his hand. "Because," she said, "I have worked very hard to stop being a person to whom things happen." He nodded slowly. "And I," he said, "have worked very hard to stop being a person who makes things happen to other people." "Yes. And so we should not." "No. But." She did not answer. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The butt sat on the table between them beside the bottle and the board and the 2 empty cups, and it was the largest object in the room, and neither of them moved to pick it up. After a while, he said, "Tell me what you do in the mornings." She understood the question. He was offering her a way out of the butt. He was offering her the ordinary, the daily, the small architecture of her new life. Something safe to talk about, something small enough to hold in the mouth. She took it. She took it gratefully. "I wake up at 6, she said. "I go down before the baker opens. I let the cat out onto the back landing, and I drink a cup of coffee standing at the window upstairs, and I watch the square wake up. The flower seller at the corner arrives at 6:30 with her van. The old woman opposite waters her geraniums at 7. The boulangerie opens its shutters at 7:15. I come downstairs at 7:30, and I set out the chairs on the pavement if the weather allows, which it usually does not in November, and I open the door at 8. Every day except Mondays." "What do you do on Mondays?" "I walk. I go to a different arrondissement each week. I have a list." "A list? A list?" "Of course you do. I have been through all 20. I have started again from the first. Which one is today's in the new round?" The 7th. I walked along the Rue de Varennes this morning. I had a pain au raisin at a café I did not like very much. I came home. And tomorrow. Tomorrow I open at 8. And the day after. The day after I open at 8. And the day after that. She looked at him. She understood what he was doing. He was not cataloguing her life. He was testing very gently the weight-bearing capacity of it. He was asking whether the small structure she had built could hold what had been placed inside it tonight, and what might yet be placed inside it, and whether it would still stand at 8 in the morning when the green door had to be unlocked and the chairs had to be set out, or not set out, and the first customer of the day had to be greeted in a language that was not the one in which she had just spent the last 3 hours. She did not know the answer. She said, "I do not know." He accepted the answer. He did not press. "Hélène," he said. "Yes." "If I were to—" He stopped. He stopped the way a man stops at the edge of a known drop, with his weight already leaning forward, and he drew his weight back deliberately. He did not finish the sentence. He closed his mouth. He picked up his glass. He did not drink. He only held it. "Finish it," she said. "No." "Please." "No, I do not. I am not going to make you responsible for a sentence I have not earned the right to say." "And when will you have earned the right?" He looked at her for a long moment. "That," he said, "is not a question I can answer tonight." She let it stand. She had to. She had said, not an hour ago, that she had worked very hard to stop being a person to whom things happened. And here was a man refusing, out of some small private principle, to let anything happen to her that he had not earned. And she could not in good conscience press him past his own line when the whole of her had been built, these last 4 years, around the sanctity of lines. She sat back. She allowed herself, for the first time since he had walked in, to look at him without looking away. He had aged, not in the obvious ways. The hair was the same pale colour, or nearly, and the line of the jaw was the same, and the posture was the same. Restrained, slightly backward-held carriage that she remembered from a marble atrium long ago. He had aged in the eyes. He had aged at the corners of the mouth. He had aged in the small region just between the brows, where a faint vertical crease had taken up permanent residence, a crease that had been a visitor in the old country and was now, clearly, a resident. He looked like a man who had spent 7 years teaching himself not to flinch. She thought, I have been doing the same thing. She thought, for 4 years. She thought, and here we are. I am going to say something, she said, and then I'm going to ask you to pretend I did not say it, if you need to. All right. She took a breath. I do not want you to leave yet. He did not answer immediately. He set his glass down. He placed both hands flat on the table, as though to steady himself against a small tremor that had not quite arrived. He looked at her. I was not going to, he said. I know. I did not want you to have to ask. I know. I wanted, he said slowly, to be asked. She understood the distinction. She understood it completely. She had spent 4 years wanting to be asked a great many things, and being asked, at last, none of them. To be asked was a small, almost intolerable courtesy. To be given the chance to say yes, to be granted the small dignity of consent. And she had forgotten, until this evening, how hungry she had become for it. She stood. She did not know, as she stood, what she was standing up to do. She only knew that sitting had become, again, too small a posture for what was in the room. She crossed to the window. She stood at the edge of the glass with her hand resting lightly against the frame, and she looked out at the Rue Lepic, at the wet cobbles, at the single shuttered window opposite that had been lit an hour ago and was dark now, at the narrow, empty street where no one was walking at this hour, in this weather, on this particular Tuesday that was now, she realized, a Wednesday. She felt him stand behind her. She did not hear him stand. He had moved quietly. She felt it in the small displacement of air at her back, in the faint warmth where the counterlamp's heat had been cut off by the shape of him, in the particular quality of the silence that changes when one is no longer alone in a room, but is instead, very specifically, standing in front of another person. He did not touch her. He stopped a foot behind her. Less. She could not have said how much less. She could feel the line of his breath at the level of her temple, or imagined she could, and she was aware with an unbearable precision of every place on her body where he was not touching her, and of the small contained distance between the back of her shoulder and the front of his, and of the copper lamp behind them throwing their joint reflection onto the rain-dark window. Two shapes, one dark, one lighter, standing very close and not touching. She looked at the reflection. He looked at it too. Neither of them moved. The rain picked up. A car passed slowly in the street below, its headlights sweeping across the window, breaking their reflection for an instant and reassembling it. And when the reflection reassembled, his hand had risen. It had not touched her. It had lifted only as far as her shoulder, and it hung there, an inch from the wool of her jumper. A hand stopped in the exact attitude of a hand about to settle. She watched it in the glass. She did not turn. She lifted her own hand, slowly, slowly, and she placed it over his, in the air, without lowering it onto her shoulder. Her palm closed lightly around the back of his fingers. She held his hand there, a hair's breadth from her own shoulder, neither landing nor withdrawing. In the window, their two reflections held the gesture. Neither of them breathed. She lowered their hands, not onto her shoulder. She drew his hand down, and her own with it, and she let both of them fall to her side. And then, because she could not think what else to do with the arrangement her body had committed her to, she stepped back half a pace so that her shoulder came to rest against the front of his, and she stood there, looking out at the Rue Lepic through the fog of her own breath on the glass, with his hand still enclosed in hers at the level of her hip. He did not move. He did not tighten his fingers. He did not speak. He only permitted himself, after a long moment, to lower his forehead the smallest possible distance until the edge of it came to rest with the lightness of a leaf against the side of her hair. That was all. That was the whole of it. A forehead against hair, a hand held at the hip, a window of rain, a café gone quiet around them. She had been touched more intimately in her life, and by people she had loved more evidently, and none of it had ever, none of it, gone through her with the particular clean depth of this. She closed her eyes. She did not cry. She was not sure in that moment that she remembered how. But something inside her chest gave, quietly, without drama, the way a chord one has been holding in tension for years, gives, at last, when one at last sets it down. And she felt the give in her knees, in the base of her throat, in the small hollow behind her sternum, where she had, without knowing it, been storing a weight she had long since stopped being able to name. "All right," he said, very softly into her hair. It was not a question. It was a registration. She nodded, just the smallest motion, enough that he would feel it against the edge of his forehead. He drew his hand free of hers and brought it slowly around to the front of her, not onto her body, not an embrace in any proper sense, only an open palm laid flat against her sternum at the level where her own breath was sitting too shallow, and held there, warm through the wool, for as long as it took her to remember how to breathe more deeply than she had been. 3 breaths. 4. He counted them with her, or seemed to. She felt the small answering rhythm of his own chest against her back, steadier than her own, deliberately steadier. And she matched her breathing to his, the way a swimmer matches her stroke to another swimmer in a cold sea. On the 5th breath, he took his hand away. He stepped back. The loss of the warmth at her back and at her sternum was physical, a small cold bloom in the places his body had been. And she stood at the window for another moment after he had moved, gathering herself before she turned. When she turned, he was at the table again. He had not sat. He stood beside his chair with his hand resting on its back, the way a man stands when he has remembered, too late, that he is in someone else's house. The copper lamp above the table threw his shadow long across the tile behind him. His hair, dried now and slightly disarrayed by the evening, had fallen forward across his brow. He looked at her across the small distance of the café with an expression she had not yet seen on his face tonight, and which she recognized, when she recognized it, as the expression of a man who had understood that he was about to take his leave and was trying to work out how. "Don't," she said. He lifted his eyes. "Don't go yet. It is nearly 2 a.m. I know what time it is. The baker across the street will be up in 3 hours. I am aware of the baker. Hélène, don't." He stopped. He did not finish the objection. He had been going to make it. She could see that. A practical objection, a reasonable objection, the kind of objection a careful man offers at the end of an evening that has already gone further than either party planned. And he had stopped because she had asked him to, and because asking tonight was something she had apparently decided she could do. "If you go now," she said, "we will neither of us sleep. You know that. You will walk back to the Marais in the rain, and you will sit in your kitchen until it is light, and you will not have slept at all. And I will go upstairs, and I will lie in the dark with a cat on my chest, and I will not have slept at all. And when the bakery opens at 5, I will come down and unlock the door and set out the chairs, and I will pretend at 8 that tonight did not happen, and I do not." Her voice caught. She did not let it break. "I do not want to pretend that tonight did not happen." He did not answer at once. He looked at his hand on the back of the chair. He looked at the small empty glass beside the plate where the last crumb of the cheese had been. He looked, finally, at her. "Tell me what you want," he said. "Precisely." She understood the request. He was not asking for a declaration. He was asking her to be specific, because specific was the only way either of them was going to survive the next hour, and because precision, his precision and hers, was the one instrument both of them had brought with them, intact out of the old country. She thought about it. She did not hurry. I want you to stay until it is light, she said. I do not want you to go up the stairs. I want the door to remain locked. I want another pot of coffee in a little while. I want you to sit across from me, and I want us to keep speaking in French. I do not want... She paused. She steadied herself. I do not want anything tonight that we cannot both be sure of in the morning. Do you understand? Yes. I am not refusing you. I know. I am refusing the version of this that would be easy to regret. Helene, I know. All right. All right. He sat down. He sat slowly with the care of a man lowering himself into a seat that might not hold his weight. And once he was seated, he placed his hands flat on the table, and he looked at the grain of the wood for a long time. And she stood by the window with her hand on the back of her neck, and she watched him look at it, and neither of them said anything until she crossed to the counter and began, without announcement, to make coffee. The machine hissed. The copper boiler muttered. The grinder made its small, particular noise. She was grateful for the noises. She was grateful, too, for the choreography of the machine, the grind, the tamp, the lock, the press, because her hands remembered it when the rest of her did not remember much at all. She brought the coffee back. 2 cups. She set his down. She sat. Tell me something, he said. What? Anything. The first thing you think of. She thought. She thought of the cat upstairs. She thought of her parents in Australia, the last letter from her mother folded inside a book beside her bed. A letter that had asked carefully whether Hermione had considered coming home for Christmas, and that she had not yet answered. She thought of the particular smell of the Rue de Varennes that morning, wet stone and wet leaves, and the smoke of a chestnut seller's brazier at the corner. She thought of none of these things. What she said instead was, I am afraid you are not real. He did not laugh. He did not take it as metaphor. He looked at her across the table with an absolute steadiness, and he said, I am real. Put your hand on the table. She put her hand on the table. He covered it with his, not at the wrist this time, at the whole of it, his palm over the back of her hand, his fingers sliding between hers, as though he had been waiting all evening to discover whether her fingers would admit his, and hers did. They admitted his the way a lock admits a key that has been cut for it, without resistance, without surprise, with a small settling of parts that had been waiting to be brought into alignment. She looked at their hands. She looked at his face. Still afraid? He said. No. Good. He did not let go. He held her hand on the table between the 2 coffee cups, and he drank his coffee with his left hand, awkwardly, and she drank hers with her left hand, equally awkwardly, and neither of them spoke about the awkwardness, and neither of them let go. The first grey showed in the window at 5:45. She watched it come. It did not arrive as light. It arrived as an easing of the dark, a slow subtraction of black from the wet cobbles, a slow addition of outline to the shuttered buildings across the street. The rain had stopped at some point in the last hour. She had not noticed it stopping. She had been looking at his hand and at his mouth when he spoke, and at the small crease between his brows that had eased over the course of the night into something less permanent than it had been at midnight. The bakery will be open in 15 minutes, she said. I know. I have to go up. I have to feed the cat. I have to change. I have to come down and set out the chairs. I know. You have to go. Yes. Neither of them moved. Drago, she said, the French vowel at the end. It was the first time she'd said his name aloud all night, and the saying of it did something to the room that she had not expected. It fixed them, briefly, into a small permanent shape, the two of them at this table, at this hour, with their hands still joined on the wood. Yes. Come back tonight. He was silent. She waited. At what time? He said finally. We close at 10. Come at 9. I will come at 9. If I am not here, you will be here. If I am not. Hélène. He lifted her hand. He turned it over. He set his lips for the length of a single breath against the inside of her wrist, at the pulse point, at the exact place his fingertips had rested 5 hours ago. And he lowered it again to the table, and he released it. He stood. He took his coat from the back of the other chair. He put it on slowly. He did not look at her while he buttoned it. When he had finished, he crossed to the door, and he waited, because she had to come and unlock it for him. And when she reached the door, she stood with her hand on the bolt for a moment before she turned it. 9, she said. 9. She slid the bolt back. She opened the green door. The Rue Lepic was grey and wet and empty. The first bread smell had begun to come from across the street. A single pigeon walked the gutter. He stepped out onto the pavement. He turned back. He looked at her face, at her hair, at the shape of her standing in the doorway of a café at 6 o'clock in the morning, in a city that was not the one either of them had been born in. And he did not smile, and he did not speak, and she understood everything he did not say. He walked away up the hill. She watched him until he turned the corner. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it, her palm flat on the wood behind her, and she listened to the silence of the café, and to the small first sounds of the waking street, and to the slow, steady drumming of her own pulse, where, all night, the wrist bone still remembered a pair of lips. The day did not behave. Hours that ought to have obeyed the clock refused to. 9 in the morning came quickly. 10 dragged. 11 took years. She set out the chairs twice, once at 7:30, when the pavement was still dark with overnight wet, and once again at 9, when she realized she had set them out wrong the first time. The small round ones on the wrong side of the door, the larger square one turned at an angle that would not do. She straightened them. She straightened them again. She caught her own hand, the third time, in the act of straightening a chair that did not need straightening, and she made herself stop and go inside. The café filled and emptied and filled again. The regulars arrived in their regular order. The flower seller from the corner came in at 10:30 for her usual noisette, looked at Hélène over the rim of her cup and said, "Tu as dormi?" And Hélène said, "Pas vraiment." And the flower seller said, "Ça se voit," and paid and left, and the morning went on. She did not think about him. She thought about him continuously. The two were, it turned out, not incompatible. There was a part of her mind that managed the till and the milk jug and the small rush at lunchtime, and there was another part that was entirely occupied all day with the inside of her own wrist, and the two parts did not interfere with each other. And by mid-afternoon, she had begun to understand that this was going to be the texture of her life from now on. A woman doing one thing on the surface and another thing underneath, and the two rhythms running alongside each other without conflict. She closed the shutters at 7 for the dinner lull. She went upstairs. She fed the cat. She stood in front of the small mirror in the bathroom and looked at herself for a long time. The glasses, the short hair, the woman called Hélène. She had not expected to see in the mirror anyone else. She saw Hélène. She also saw, very faintly, as though through a second glass set just behind the first, the other one, the long-haired woman, the one who had folded Le Grand Monde to the bottom of a stack in a school library so that a boy with pale hair could pretend not to be looking at her. She took the glasses off. She put them back on. Both women, she decided, could go downstairs. She reopened at 8. The evening was clear. The rain of the previous night had washed the sky clean, and the sunset had been pink over the rooftops of the 18th arrondissement. And the customers who came in at this hour had the particular softened quality of people who had walked through a beautiful evening to get to her. She served them. She smiled. She felt the whole time the slow approach of 9 o'clock, the way one feels the approach of a tide. At 5 minutes to 9, she stopped being able to pretend she was not watching the door. At 9 exactly, he was not there. At 2 minutes past 9, he was not there. At 4 minutes past 9, the green door opened, and he was. He was not wet tonight. His coat was the same coat, but dry. The wool of it settled smoothly across his shoulders, in the way a good coat settles when it has not been rained on. He had shaved. He had slept, or not slept. She could not tell from the doorway. He stood for a moment just inside the threshold, and he looked at her across the room, and he did not smile, and neither did she, and the not smiling was an entire conversation. "Bonsoir," he said. "Bonsoir." He took the corner table, the same one. He sat with his back to the room this time too, though he turned his head as she approached so that he could watch her come. She brought him a coffee without asking. She sat down across from him without asking. There were 3 other customers in the café, and she could not, in good conscience, keep the door locked tonight. But she had the counter, and she had the till, and she had her notebook and her pencil, and none of them tonight required her attention. "You came," she said. "I said I would. People have said that before. Not me." It was said without emphasis. A small correction. She accepted it. She did not press. "How was your day?" he said. "Long." "Yes. And yours?" "I translated 17 lines of a contract. Badly. I walked to the Pont des Arts at 2 o'clock. I stood on it for 40 minutes. I walked back. I did not eat lunch. I did not sleep. I came here." She almost smiled. A productive day. Extraordinarily. The evening went by. She got up twice to serve other customers. She came back both times. He did not try to occupy her when she was working. He only waited patiently, with his hands flat on the table and his eyes on whatever small piece of the room was nearest. And when she sat down again, he picked up precisely where they had left off, as though the interruptions had not happened at all. At 9:45, he said, "May I help you close?" "You may not." "Why not?" "Because if I let you behind the counter tonight, I will never again be able to pretend to myself that you have not been behind it, and I am not yet ready to make that particular concession." He inclined his head. He accepted the ruling. The last customers left at 10 past 10. She locked the door. She flipped the sign. She did not make a second pot of coffee tonight. She only stood behind the counter with her hands flat on the zinc, and she looked at him across the small empty café, and she said, "Come here." He came. He came around the counter without hesitation, the first time in 4 years that anyone had done so, and he stopped when he was within arm's reach of her, and he waited. His hands remained at his sides. The line he had drawn for himself the night before was still there. She could see it in the careful stillness of his shoulders, in the way he had stopped at exactly the distance beyond which he would not presume. She closed the distance herself. She did it slowly. She did it deliberately. She placed her palms flat against the front of his coat, at the level of his ribs, and she felt beneath the wool the warmth of him and the faint, slow movement of his breath. And she stood there for a moment with her hands pressed against him and her eyes fixed on the middle button of his coat. "Look at me," he said quietly. She looked up. His face, at this distance, was a face she had never properly seen. She had known it in profile across countless classrooms, in 3/4 across a dueling hall, in the wreckage and the aftermath and the courtroom. She had never seen it from 12 inches away in the amber light of a café lamp, with nothing on it but what was on it now. The small, faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the place where his mouth softened when he was not holding it hard. The grey of the eyes, which was, she had been correct, the grey of the Seine in November, and which was, at this distance, not a colour at all, but a weather. She lifted one hand from his coat. She laid it against the side of his jaw. He turned his face the smallest fraction of an inch toward her palm. That was all. A fraction. She felt the rasp of where he had shaved this morning, and the faint warmth of where the blood moved beneath the skin, and she felt him close his eyes, and she felt him exhale, and the exhale was long and slow, and had in it the sound of a man setting down. At last, a weight he had not realized he was still carrying. She kissed him. She did it without announcement. She did it because she had decided somewhere between the bolt on the door and the button of his coat that she was going to, and because waiting any longer would have been a cruelty she could not bring herself to commit, against him or against herself. His mouth was warm. His mouth was careful. It was not the kiss of a man who had been waiting all day. It was the kiss of a man who had been waiting 7 years, and who had decided, with a particular precision she had come to recognize as his, that he was not going to spend this particular kiss making up for any of them. He kissed her slowly. He kissed her once. He drew back an inch. He looked at her. He kissed her again, the same way, with the same slowness, and his hand came up at last from his side and settled against the back of her neck, under the short ends of her hair, and the warmth of his palm at that small exposed place went through her like the Armagnac had, the night before, down through the chest, slow, grounding, true. She lifted onto the balls of her feet. She wound her arms up around his neck. He drew her in against the front of his coat, carefully, as though she were a thing that could be broken by being held too quickly. And she let herself be drawn, and she let herself be held. And for a long moment the two of them stood behind the zinc counter of a small café in Montmartre, with their arms around each other and their foreheads touching, and the copper lamps still burning overhead. Neither of them spoke for a long time. When she did speak, it was in English. She had not meant to. It came out that way. 4 years of Hélène, 4 years of oui and non, and je t'en prie. And the first word she said after he kissed her was an English word, and she did not try to call it back. Hermione, she said. My name. I remember your name. Say it. He drew back the smallest distance. He looked at her. He said it. Hermione. The old sound, the English consonants. The name she had not heard aloud in 4 years. She had expected, if she was honest with herself, to flinch from it. She had expected the name to feel like a coat she had outgrown, or like a room she could not go back into. It did not. It felt like her name. It felt, in his voice, like a thing that had been kept safely somewhere for her, in a place she had not known about, and that was now being returned to her in good condition. Thank you, she said. For what? For not saying it until I asked. He did not answer. He kissed her again instead, once on the mouth, and once, very lightly, on the place at the corner of her eye, where, without her noticing, a small wetness had gathered. And he drew back, and he held her by the shoulders at arm's length. And he looked at her for a long moment with an expression she understood, finally, was happiness. It was only that she had not seen it on his face before, and had therefore not, at first, known what it was. Hermione, he said again, would you come upstairs with me? Not tonight. I do not mean tonight. I mean, in some week that is not this one. Would you come to the Marais? Would you let me cook badly for you in a small kitchen? Would you meet a woman called Madame Lenoir, who will approve of you immediately and then pretend for at least a year that she does not? Yes. Yes to which? Yes to all of it. Good. And you, she said, will you come here? Tomorrow, and the day after, and, yes, at 9. At 9. Every night. Every night you will have me. She kissed him again. She did it because she wanted to, because she could, because he was standing in her café, and she had been given, against all her own careful arithmetic, a thing she had stopped permitting herself to want. Above them, the copper lamp hummed. Outside, the Rue Lepic was dry tonight, the cobbles pale under the street lamps, the sky above the roofs clear for the first time in days. A single star was visible over the chimney pots of the building opposite, faint and persistent, the kind of star Paris almost never allowed you to see. She did not lock the door to keep him in. She locked it because it was closing time, and because the café was hers, and because the small ordinary ritual of turning the bolt and flipping the sign had, tonight, been given back to her in a different shape. No longer the gesture of a woman shutting the world out at the end of another identical day, but the gesture of a woman closing one particular door on one particular evening, with one particular person inside it, and turning, in the amber quiet, toward what came next. He was waiting for her at the foot of the stairs. He held out his hand. She crossed the small empty room, and she took it, and she did not let go.
So that's where I leave them, in a small cafe in Paris, at the foot of a staircase, with their hands held. I didn't want to give them a big ending. I didn't want fireworks. I wanted a door that closes quietly, a lamp that is still on. Two people who finally stop running, because I think that's what real love looks like sometimes. Not a grand moment, just a choice, a small one, made again and again, to stay, to come back, to open the door at 9. Hermione spent 4 years hiding. Draco spent 7. They both built quiet lives. They both thought that was enough, and maybe it was, but quiet is not the same as full, and one rainy night they remembered the difference. I love writing them like this, not as enemies, not as storm, as two tired people who finally sit down at the same table and breathe. If this story moved you even a little, please leave a comment, tell me what you felt, tell me which part stayed with you. I read everyone, and if you want more stories like this, slow, soft, full of rain and candlelight, subscribe. Stay with me. There are more nights to write, more coffees, more doors. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Until the next story.